Hello everyone, we are SMLRA and today we're bringing you a session on data handling and visualization. We're going to be focusing on 4 particular libraries, that is NumPy, Pandas, Matplotlib and Seaborn. So let's dive right in. We'll start with NumPy.
And that this is almost twice as fast in NumPy as in normal vanilla Python. And on the right, we are adding 1 to all the elements of the array. And this one is almost 36 times faster in NumPy as compared to vanilla Python. And by utilizing these are just some normal basic examples, but NumPy can be as fast as like 100, 200 times the speed of vanilla Python. In some cases, it's even faster than C++. It is an extremely huge boost in speed. So now, why is NumPy so fast? There are 3 main reasons for this: the language and the compiler that NumPy uses, vectorization, which I'll go into real detail. This is a very important topic, and specially optimized code for different operations. So NumPy is a Python package, just like SciPy, but many people don't know that it is actually written in C and Fortran. It's just that NumPy is a Python wrapper over those languages. And that's one of the main reasons why NumPy is so fast. Basically, because C and Fortran are statically typed languages. Okay. And in static languages are way faster than dynamic languages like Python. Because in dynamic languages, you don't actually specify the type of variable or the return type or anything like that. So the compiler needs to figure that out. So it takes a lot of time. And loops, and especially loops, are very slow in dynamic languages as compared to static languages. This is one of the main reasons. Like this can boost even normal C++ code is around 8 to 12 times faster than Python code. And when coupled with different function operations that are actually nested within each other, you can reach speeds up to 100 to 100 times faster just by changing the language. So there are basically certain packages like Cython that allow you to execute your C code as Python. Okay, these are just wrapper libraries. Even NumPy has an inbuilt variables known as C types, which you can study in detail if you want to. And that's like one of the main reasons why NumPy is so fast. Another way NumPy that can be made faster is that you can use Numba, which is an open source JIT compiler. Okay, now JIT stands for just-in-time compiler. So in just-in-time compilers, the compilation actually happens during runtime, which further increases the speed. This was initially created for Java environments, but it has also been extended to Python and C environments. Now let's go into the second and most important topic of this session, which is vectorization. Now many people just generally use the term vectorization interchangeably as to why NumPy is fast without knowing actually what it does. So vectorization is basically the process of carrying out multiple operations at the same time. Okay. It is very much related to the concept of parallelism, and it utilizes data parallelism for it. Make sure you don't confuse this with concurrency. Okay, so now what actually is the difference between parallelism, concurrency, and sequential data processing? Let's get into that. In sequential processing, let's just assume that we have 4 processes, and each of those processes A, B, C, and D take 10 seconds to complete. So if we just run this thing sequentially, first process A will be completed at the 10-second mark, B at 20-second mark, and C at 30-second, and D at 40-second mark. So total time is 40 seconds. Now, if it's running concurrently, so there are a lot of different algorithms, for concurrent computation, like round robin or first come first serve or shortest job first algorithms. And let's just assume that it's using round robin for this, and then you know that every 2 seconds process A will do, and the next 2 seconds process B will go, the next 2 seconds process C, and so on. So even though all the processes actually come to an end very close in time, but the total time taken for all the processes will still be 40 seconds. So there is no change in overall speed. But in parallelism, the 4 processes will run individual of each. will run individually, like independent of each other, like on 4 different threads of 4 cores or on 4 different machines altogether. So instead of 40 seconds, it will only take 10 seconds. Like this is one of the main reasons why NumPy is so fast. Okay, and the reason why it can use this data parallelism concept is locality of reference. So locality of reference basically means that when you have some certain memory blocks, okay, the compiler can access those certain memory blocks or certain memory locations very fast if they are close together. That is why NumPy is so fast, because NumPy arrays store the data in contiguous memory. I'll go into that in detail in later slides. So how does vectorization actually work? It basically uses SIMD instructions, which is single instruction multiple data. That means you run the same instruction on multiple data at once, like I showed you in the previous example, how we add 1 to all the elements of the array. That is, it's just one instruction, but it's being executed on multiple data points. Okay, so just take a look at this example. Okay, let's assume a computer has an AVX 512 instruction set. That means you can work on 16 integers at the same time. Okay, so if you have a array of 16 integers, you can either load them into the register one by one and then execute them one by one, which will, let's assume one process takes 1 second. So you will have total of 16 processes and it will take 16 seconds. Or you could just load all 16 values at once and then execute it, which will only take 1 second. So it will cut that execution time from n to n by 16. This is exactly how vectorization works. Like it actually also depends on what kind of processor or computer you have and like how much memory or register can store and so on. Now let's talk about some of the individual optimizations. Now, to be honest, there are a lot of different individual optimizations that can be applied in different NumPy operations. But let's just consider the array optimizations because those are the most widely used ones. Okay, so first let's take a look at what makes NumPy arrays different from Python lists. We know that Python lists can be of varying sizes and can have elements of different data types in it. This will basically result in a lot of memory overhead. So Python lists have 4 main components that influence their size. The size is basically the size of the object or the list. The object, which is the actual object, it keeps into account the bits of the object. So you know what object it is. Object type basically means the type of the object, whether it's int, float, whatever. And reference count is basically used to count the number of times the object has been referenced. This is mainly used for garbage collection, because in Python, how garbage collection works is the compiler looks at it will look at the reference count of the object and see if that reference count is less than 0, then it will consider it as garbage and delete that and free that memory space. So it's used for that. So now let's assume that we have a list of integers. So in Python, each of this thing is worth 4 bytes. So object type, size, and reference count. So 4 into 4, that's 16 bytes of memory. Now this can also go up to 32 bytes because if we use int float objects. And so while compare this to a NumPy array, which only contains 32, which only contains int 32 objects, this is only 4 bytes in size because it doesn't have all those extra overhead. So NumPy arrays are fixed in size and they only contain elements of one type. So now the other thing that I discussed earlier about locality of reference, like NumPy arrays utilize contiguous memory. Okay, like you can see below here, this NumPy array, all the data points are, the memory location is contiguous. There are no gaps in the memory. And this is for a Python list, like there are gaps in it. So because this doesn't have any gaps, the locality of reference principle is applied and you can actually apply vectorization on it. So now there are a lot of different things that NumPy can be used for. Like some of them are polynomial algebra, like to Fourier transforms, Laplace transforms. You can also use it to find eigenvalues and eigenvectors, 3D geometry. There are like basically a lot of things. So I'll just show you the notebook and some of the easy array methods and so on. So does anybody have any questions up till this part? If not, we can just continue. I'll wait for some time. So I assume this is clear, and since nobody's asking any questions, so let's just move on to the notebook. All right. So as you can see, let me just zoom in a bit. In this first cell, we are just importing the libraries, and this np.array. Now this is the most basic NumPy function. It is used to create an array out of a Python list. Okay. And this is a function which is used to create a random array of any shape with random values between 0 and 1. These will be float values. So now this is just a 2D array which I've created, and this is its shape. So now the shape is basically the dimension of that array. So now how do you actually figure out what the shape of an array is? The outermost array, okay, the outermost array is the first shape, is the first element in the tuple. Then the innermost list will be the last element. I'll just show you this with an example. So okay, so let's consider this. Okay, so what exactly will be the shape of this element, this array? So as you can see, we have two lists in the outermost. We have two elements in the outermost list. Then we have two elements in the inner list, and then we have three elements even inside of that. So the shape of this list will be 2, 2, and 3. All right. So now this is how we replace or get an element in NumPy. So as you know, in normal Python, you just the name of the list and the index, the element you want. But in NumPy, the list can be multidimensional. So this is, like I said, the first dimension, the second dimension, and so on. This will give you the element. This will basically find the element at the first row and ninth column, which in this case is 9. And similarly, you can replace it as well, just as you do in Python. The only thing you need to be aware of is that the dimension of the part of the list that you are replacing is the same as the dimension of the thing you are replacing it with. Like if the dimensions are not the same, this will throw an error. Now there are actually a lot of different special arrays to in NumPy, which are used for different purposes. Like np.zeros will create an array of zeros, np.ones will create an array of ones, np.full will create an array of any integer or any float that you give it to, and np.empty will just create an empty array. Now, as you can see below, I've printed out the times it takes to create each array. All right. So now, as in no, like wait a second, let me just run this again. So as you know, since like Google Colab is actually not that strong of a machine, so you can't actually see the difference in time, but I'll just show you the time difference over here. This will be much more clear if I show it to you. Yeah, like as you can see over here, the time taken to create a zero array full of zeros is actually approximately 200 times faster when you compare it with the time taken to create an array of just one and of any other integer. While the time taken to create an empty array is even 100 times faster when compared to an array of zeros. All right. So one main reason for that is that when you create an array of only zeros, all that NumPy has to do is allocate that memory and turn all the bits to 0, which is a lot faster when you compare it with like changing the bits of each memory location or each data point in the memory to, let's say, 5 or 6 or any other number. Similarly, but then why is empty faster than zeros? That's because a lot of people have that misconception that np.empty will actually create an array of zeros, but that is not the case. np.empty will just allocate that memory for that array. It will not actually fill it with zeros or any other number. It will just be garbage values or any other values. It will not necessarily be 0. So a lot of people actually get confused between np.0 and np.empty, but yeah, like if you want your array to only have zeros, do not use np.empty. Now let's go over operations in a 3D array. Okay, so when you take a look at this is the operations are exactly similar as that to a 2D or 1D array. It's just that when you imagine a 3D array, imagine it as a cube. Like the first dimension is the width, the second dimension is the height, and the last dimension is the depth. You can see this is the shape of the array. All right. Similarly, replacing arrays is also the same, and getting elements is also the same. So now let's get into mathematical operations and some linear algebra. Now, one main reason to use NumPy is that it actually allows you to use matrix multiplication. It will allow you to multiply two matrices. Now, just keep in mind that the rules for matrix multiplication do need to be followed, like the number of columns of the first matrix should be equal to the number of rows of the second matrix for this to work. Now, how does this work? You can also use matrix multiplication by using the at operator. You can like read it more about it in the NumPy docs, and like np.mat will also use that at operator internally to multiply two matrices. Similarly, you can also do trigonometric functions by using np.sine and or np.cosine if you wanted to, and get the answer. Like these are just some basic examples that I showed you, but there are a lot of different things that can be done by NumPy. Like I said earlier, you can use it to create eigenvectors and eigenvalues. You can use it to create a 3D mesh grid to maybe convert that into a polygon and use it in a 3D graphics generator like Blender or Unity. Or you can also use for Fourier transforms and Laplace transforms and so on. So like that is it by my part. If you have any questions, go ahead and feel free to ask. I guess nobody has any questions. So let's just move on to the next topic, which is pandas and how they actually work by Shubham Verma.
Hello guys, I'm Shubham Verma, AI promoter at SMRA. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
And is the screen visible of like the Google Colab screen?
Yeah, it is.
So hello guys. So we are going to talk about pandas, like what is panda and how we use it. So in machine learning or in any data stream, pandas are very important because they give you the benefit, the feature of working with tabular data. That is mostly done in machine learning to accept data from the data set. And whereas in NumPy, as Gaurav just talked about NumPy, we prefer when we have numerical data. So for that reason, Panda is like one of the most preferred libraries used for machine learning and data science. So these are just definitions and what Panda is. So let's directly jump to like what we can do with pandas and what are the features of pandas and what are the different functionalities that we can use in pandas. So as you can see here, This is a small it's a small introduction to what Panda is, what is series, what is data frame, what is panel, what is 45 memory pandas. So we are going to cover all this in this session of pandas. So basically, Panda consume more memory than NumPy, but it has more functionalities, as I said just now. And if you suppose have more than 500,000 rows in your data set, then Panda is the best library to perform operations on it. Whereas in NumPy, if you have more than 50K rows, it becomes very difficult to like perform operations on it. So let's just directly jump on how we do different things and how we perform. So first of all, we'll import pandas as PD because we don't want to write pandas again. So let's first discuss about series. So if suppose you have any list or any dictionary or any array that you want to convert into pandas, you can just use pd.series function to convert that. So this is just an example of how I can add two series and convert it into a data frame. So as you can see here, I have a list. In this list, I have three numbers, that is 10, 20, and 30. And this list I want to convert into a data frame. So what is data frame? First, let's understand what is data frame. As in NumPy, we had multi-dimensional arrays. In pandas, we have data frames. So if suppose you want to convert this into data frame, what you have to do is into pandas data frame. That what you have to do is you have to just type pd.series and the list you have to pass, and it will be converted into that thing. So as you can see here, it is been converted into data frame like thing. It is converted into panda series. So similarly, now this series has been converted into panda series, but here as you can see here, the index and the values are 0, 1, 2. The index is 0, 1, 2, and you don't want index to be 0, 1, 2. If suppose you want something else to be an index, what you can do is you can use the index. You can describe the index and you can just pass in that pd series. Data is the array. Data is the array, and the index is the index that you want. So it will be represented in this way, as you can see in the screen. Now suppose you want to convert a dictionary into pandas. The same function can be used as series function. The dictionary can also be easily converted into pandas. So why we are doing this? Why we are doing these things? So if suppose we want to train a machine learning model and you have a data in form of list, or if you have a data in form of some columns or in some other text, or in some file, a CSV file or JSON file. So what you can do is you can use pandas. You can import the data into your code. After importing, you can perform data manipulation, data filtering. Because as you know, there are many parameters that you have to look when you do machine learning. So you have to tune every parameter. So tuning is very important. If suppose you over tune a parameter or you under tune a parameter for machine learning, then that can be very it can give you very bad results. The accuracy of the model can be very bad. So to increase the accuracy of the model or to increase how the model performs, we have to do data filtering and data manipulation, and that thing is done by pandas. Now we will look about other features of pandas. Like we can directly add series. We can get the information of where the specific item is present in the list. As here we are doing this on a very small scale. Like this is only this list only contains only 4 values. But suppose if you have a very large set of like 50,000, 60,000 rows, and then you have to perform data manipulation, data filtering operations, then this operations become very useful for us, like searching where the value is and how we have to perform with the value, what we have to do with that value. So we have just created a list, we have given an index, and then we have just printed a list. And here in the sentence, we have found where the thing is present in the list. The next thing that we have did is we have performed print series 1 and series 2. So the thing you can notice here on the index for index 1, for US it was index 1. For Germany index it was 2. For the USSR it was 3, and for Japan it was 4. But here we change USSR to Italy in the 3rd position. So as you can see here, when we add these two, what will be done is the Italy and USSR, which are not present in both the list, will not be added, and NaN will be printed. NaN value will be printed. This means there is nothing to be added, and the other things that were present, they are added. Now we will talk about data frames. As I just said, in Python, in NumPy we had multi-dimensional arrays. In pandas we have data frames. So this is how I created. I had list of three into 4 dimensional array, and then just represented into data frames. So this is how it can be represented in data frames. Similarly, if you want the shape of the shape and the index of the data frame, that can also be can be obtained by just using df.shape and df.index. So by this thing, you can get the shape. What was the shape of the data frame that you had? It was 4,3, and the index. The index. What does this thing implies is the index will start from 0. That is, it will start from 0. It will go till 4 as you have 4 lists to be completed, and the step will be taken. And the step that are taken is 1. What the step implies is how much jump you are taking. Like from the first value, you are jumping to second, then third, then fourth. If you want the alternate values, then you can take a step 2. So it will be giving you the alternate values. So similarly, the thing has been performed here. We are just added the index values and the column values. So in this way, you can create any data frame that you want. If suppose you want to create your own data set for your machine learning model or for your data science project or something, then what you can do is you can have the data set, you can label it, you can like add parameters to it. And you can then train the model, and while training, you can see which parameter is impacting your model and can tune that parameter. The next function that we have is join function. This helps us to join. There are two types of join. One is inner, the other one is outer. This is out. Here I've applied outer join. So what I did is this df2, which is this list, and this df. I've added this. I have just joined this both. So as you can see here the index was ABCD, and here the index was 0, 1, 2, 3. So what have happened in 0? It has created a table. In this table, you have 0, 1, 2, 3, and then index ABC. Okay. And this, like the first table didn't have ABCD. So what data did it is here it added nan. And similar for the second thing also. So you got a whole table of like different values joined together. This is outer function. Two things have joined overlapping each other. If you have inner, which are not overlapping. And if suppose you have inner function, then what will happen is the thing that is common in first table and second table, that will only be shown to you. In outer, everything is shown, and in inner only the common thing will be shown to you. Now what I have did is I have taken a data set, a titering data set, and I will perform few operations on it using pandas. So if you have attended last session on machine learning, we have took the same data set for our logistic regression thing, and we have performed machine learning on it. So there we saw how we can change different parameters, what parameters really impact our machine learning model. So this thing also we will understand how this thing can be used and how data frames and pandas are used in that. So I've just imported the training.csv file, which is provided during the GitHub. So you have to just import you have to just read the file here, and once I read, this is something how the model looks like. As you can see here, the model contains passenger ID, survived pre-class, the name, the sex, the age of the passenger traveling on board. This is a Titanic test. So now you can see there are 890 rows and 12 columns. Now what we have did is we first tried what's the information of this whole table is. So this thing is very useful. If suppose you're performing any a data operation or building any model, you first should know what the data set like how your data set looks like what the things it contains. So as you can see here, passengers have 891 null values. So as you can see here, there were 891 rows. So so the data of every passenger is available, like the name of every passenger, passenger IDs for every passenger is available. Similarly for name, if you see there are 891 names available with us. If you see here the age, there are only 714 non-null values. That means there are few ages of the passengers corresponding to that they are missing. So then what we can do is we will perform different operations. We will find the missing values that will be taken ahead in this session. We'll find the missing values. We will fill the missing values in that to get a uniformity in our data set. This function, the head function, it is used to get a top view of data set. So here's a pass 10. If I don't pass 10, what will happen is the default is 5. So what will be done is if you put this dot head, the first 10 values of a data set will be displayed. So as you can see here that it is starting from 0 and going till 9. Similarly, if you don't put here 10, only the top 5, default is 5. So only the top 5, 0 to 4 will be displayed to you. Okay. Similarly, as we had tail, we have said we have tail. Tail will give you the end view of your data set. how your data set looks at the end. So these are the values that we have at the end of our data set. This is the index value, as we discussed ahead about the index, how index works, what is indexes. This function is called dot unique function. What does it does is it gives you the unique values of the column. As you can see here, I have taken name, the name column of the data set. Here the data set was the name column, and I have printed the unique values of the column. So all the unique names that were present in the data set were printed here. Okay, guys. So now the next thing that we will do is we will classify different data types in our data set, and on the basis of that, we will use different functions. So what I did is I first find out what are the data types of my different columns. So as you can see, a passenger ID was int64, the name was the age was float 64. So these are the different data types of the data that are present in these columns. Now you can see here, like what I did is I filtered out the the columns which have int64 in them, like whose data types are int64. So as you can see here, dot select data type. This is dot select data type corresponds to dot select data type include equal to int64. So all the columns of our data set which had data type int equal to int64 are printed here. So as you can see here, passenger ID was int64, survived class was int64, P class was int64. So these all things are printed here. These operations are very useful, as I said earlier too. While you're performing a different, like building different models or performing different tasks of your machine learning or data science. Then the next thing that comes, as you can see, it was include. Then if you don't want to include this certain data type, you can exclude it. Again, the same function, select underscore data exclude int64. Then all the columns that didn't have int64 as a data type are printed here. You can see here name, sex, and age. The name had object, the sex was object, and the age was float 64. So all not integer 64 data types are printed here. So this is like I just wanted to print the columns, what columns I had. So I just printed the columns, and the columns that were present are printed here. Then the same thing I did to show that we have to perform different operations on it. This is n unique. So why we have did is to get what is the difference between unique and non-unique and unique. So what is n unique means is it will of all data present in the data set which is unique, and the nan is not there. Like in age it has 88 unique values, and in that 88 unique values nan is not included. That is, if you don't have any passenger's age value, then it is not counted. So in the whole data set of age, you have only 88 correct values, 88 unique correct values. Okay, this is embark from where the passenger voted where he want to go. So this is the embark column that we had in our data set. So we just value counted it, like we just counted what are the corresponding values in it and how much they are. As you can see here, wow, this was our embark. It contains mostly it contains only three values, S, C, and Q. So we counted it, like how many passengers departed or boarded from S station, then C station, then Q station. Then as you can see here, we can do this directly, or if suppose you want any specific, like if suppose you want only S, how many started with the journey from S or ended the journey from S, what you can do is you can just pass this parameter .loc underscore df, these are like data set, and just pass embark equal to S and value count. So it will count how many were there from S, 664 were there from S. The same thing can be performed by this thing too. Dot value count square bracket 0. So what this thing implies is dot value count, like count all the parameters that are present in a column and give the maximum of that. Like as you can see, the S is maximum, so it is printing 644. If I give instead of 0, I press I put 1 here, then it will print 168. So it gives a maximum, like what was the maximum in that maximum number? What was the maximum number in that? So now what I did is in the sex column that we had, I counted how many male were present. So this thing counted how many male passengers present in our data set. So why we are doing this is, if you have attended our last session on machine learning in logic regression, we have found that many females on the ship survived, and many of the male, as you all know, the Titanic story, many of the females survived and many male lost their lives. So by this thing, we can get how many total were there, how many after that survived. So we can create a idea of our data set and how we can perform different operations on it. So So guys, till now, do you have any doubt? Like, is there any doubt till now? Is there any doubt, guys, till now? Okay, so no one is speaking, so I suppose there is no doubt. I will move ahead. So now we will like talk about data manipulation. How we have to, if you want to manipulate our data, what our data is, and how the data looks, and what different operations we can manipulate in there. So as you can see here, I have just the same column. I have took the same name column. Just printed the top head of like the top 5 of the values of it. So these are the values that we have printed. Now, if suppose you want only 2 columns of a data set to be printed, that is the name and the sex column. Then the thing is you can just use this list of list, name comma sex in the column names in that, and you can just print the list. So this thing will be printed. Only 5 values are printed because I have used head function here, as we have discussed head above. Only the top overview of the data set is being given to us. This head function that we saw just now can be like we can use it in different way too. What we can do is we can open a list and we can type till where we need, like till where we need the values to be printed. So as you can see here, it starts from the start of the list and it goes to 29. This 30 is the end of the list and the end value is not included. So it is from 0 to 29. So as you can see it, the values of 0 to 29 of the data set are printed here. Then we are performing like simple operations. As you can see here, I wanted to build a data set in which I wanted 3 columns x, y, and z. In max column, I wanted values that are power of 2. That is 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. So what I did is I just pass x equal to 2 to the power np dot 8 is 5. So for every time it will take to the power 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then till 4 it will go. It is from 0 to 4. That is A. Similarly, for Y did for the power of 3 and for Z, I just gave an array. And then I gave the index to the dataset and printed the dataset. So it was looking something like that. This is like if suppose you want your dataset to print, if you want your value of the dataset, but after some jumps or some steps, like here you can see, I started my list of the dataset from starting. I ended it till 9 and I took jumps at 3. Like I will first see the value at the first position, that is 0. I will take a jump of 3 and I will print the third value, then 6 value, then 9 value. So it is very useful when you want alternative values of a dataset to be printed. Or if we want a dataset after some time, like after some interval, like 50, then 100. So this thing can be done. It is this is ILOC. This is ILOC function. What does it do? It does the same thing. It will print the value 0 to 4. But the difference between ILOC and LOC is in LOC you can see the last value of the data set is included. Sorry, the list is included. The 6 is as the 6 is the last index, the stopping index. It is included, but in ILOC it is not included. It goes with 0, 2, and 4, but here it goes with 0, 2, 4, and 6. So depending on your usage and depending on your what you want as output, you can use different functions. Then what we did is we just printed the unique values of the age. So as you can see here, this is non present, and there might be some repeated values too. So we just used n unique. So it printed 88, and you can count here. It is 19. So out of this, only 88 were correct values of age that we saw above. Then what we did is we filtered a dataset on the basis of from where the people embark. Like we just wanted people who embarked from S. So like we just printed what are the values who embark from S. So as you can see here, all the values of the dataset where the persons embark from S are printed. So as you can see here, the S was 644. Above we saw the same 644 is printed here. Then comes if suppose you want a data set like you want your data set to have some parameters to it, like to add some parameters. Like suppose you want the output of the data set in which the age is greater than 20, the sex of the passenger is female, and she embarked from C. So we just use and then operators here, and we just pass the parameters that we wanted. That is, we open a list of under the dataset and we just pass the values and we got the output. So as you can see, everyone who embarked from C, everyone who is female, and everyone whose age is greater than 20 is being printed in this list in this output. The next thing is describe function. So what this function does is it describes about that column. Like suppose I have asked a name, so it will describe the name. Is there present in the name? How many unique count? Like how many unique values are there in the column name? then what is the first value, what is the frequency, and the data type of that column. Now, if suppose you want to drop a certain column, if suppose you want to drop a value, like suppose if you are training a machine learning model, then the value, the column name doesn't really matters because it will not give you like any fruitful output. So what you have to do is you have to drop that output. So what we can use is the function that we can use is drop function, dot drop. You have to just specify the name of the column that you want to drop. This axis one implies the column. If suppose I put the value x is equal to 1, then the name of the column with the name drop will be dropped. So as you can see here, there is no column name here. And in the above data sets, there were columns like there were column of names. As you can see, here name was there present in this. So now after dropping the value, we have only 11 columns. Before it will 12. So this is how the drop function works. There is one more parameter in the drop function that is in place. In place. If you put true here, what will happen is it will reflect to in PLAC. It will reflect on all over the dataset. Like if you don't put true here, only the output here, it will not have the name column. But if you put in place equal to true, all the outputs that you had in the whole operations that you did, everywhere the column will be dropped, like the column name will be dropped. So guys, I will now let you to ask, I will allow you to ask questions if you have any doubt or if you want to know about anything. So is there any doubt or queries that you have till now? So I suppose there are no queries. So I will like to call Ria to continue with pandas. She will take other parameters like other modules of pandas and what are the functions that we have in pandas. So Ria.
Thank you, Shubham. So, guys, I'm Ria, and I'm a community mentor at SMLRA. I'll be continuing off Shubham's topic. So, just let me know quickly if my screen is visible.
No, your screen is not visible.
Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah, it's visible now.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, handling missing values in pandas. So, what is missing data, and why do we need to handle it properly? So, handling missing values is an essential part of data cleaning and preparation process because almost all data in real life comes with some missing values. It can happen because of anything, like even if the data wasn't collected or it never existed for that matter. We can represent missing data as none or NaN. NaN is the acronym for not a number. So NaN is a special floating point value recognized by all systems that use standard IEEE floating point representation. So to understand this, we'll just take a very basic example. And since this is a very basic example and we aren't using a huge data set, I think Jatin has given the link. You guys can code along and just try out whatever values you want to change and try out all these functions too. So first I'll import pandas and NumPy over here. I have so I put 3 subjects and 3 students. So the marks for math, science, and English are as follows. Now I'll reindex it to I'll add one more subject as data science. Now since I've not entered the marks for data science, Python will recognize it as NaN, which is not a number. So now to find the missing data, like here this data is missing, we use a Boolean function which is NA, like which is if the value is null, it will return true. So this is how we get the value if it's missing. We have one more function which is exactly inverse of this, which is not NA. And so since we can see here, we get all of these are false and here all of these are true. Since this is since we don't have a proper value for this, this will give us false. Now for handling, we can also drop for some data sets, it's possible that we just don't need the entire row or entire column. So this is explained well by Shubham. So we can just drop the particular row, which is null. So what this does is it drops the null row. Then we come to filling out missing data. So one part of handling missing data is either you can drop the entire row or column, or you can actually fill it out properly, giving the average values or even some values you want. So the first one is fill any. What this does is you can fill with any of the values you want. You can take out the values, you can calculate an approximate value, and you can even add it to the entire row or column. Or you can just use a forward fill method, which is what I've used here. So the forward fill method will print the exact values what it was here, like whatever was here in the previous row. We also have the interpolate function, which takes out the average values for that, and pandas will fill it. Sorry. Does anyone have any doubts till now? Okay, we move ahead. So what interpolate functions does is pandas fills it out nicely using the midpoints of the point or midpoints between the points. So if this was a curvilinear function, we would fit a function and it will find the average in another way. So we'll look at a better example to understand interpolate method. Here we consider a time series. Let's say we are monitoring a machine and on some days it fails to report. Like see here we are monitoring for every this will give us the date, like this is 27th of December 2021. So this is a machine which has been monitoring some data every day. So on 2 of these days it fails to report the data. Now I want an approximate value for this, so I'll use df.interpolate. Now if I print the data frame, I get an approximate value, which is the value in between the two rows. So yeah, you get the gist of interpolate function. So we come to correlation. What is correlation? It's basically variables within a data set can be related for lots of reasons. Like one variable could cause or depend on values of another variable. It could be lightly associated with another variable, or two variables could also depend on a third variable. It is useful in data analysis and modeling to better understand the relationships between the variables. The statistical relationship between the two variables is what is referred to as correlation. Yeah, so as I said, correlation can be positive or negative, or like slightly positive or slightly negative. So if it's positive correlation, both variables change in the same direction. If it's neutral correlation, no relationship in the change of variables. And if it's a negative correlation, variables change in the opposite directions. So in data science, we use the R value, which is also called the Pearson's correlation coefficient. This measures how closely two sequence of numbers are correlated. So see here, I'm just mentioning a data frame here. I'll explain it later, but you can see the values. They are always between 1 and -1. So it shows if it's positively or negatively correlated, if it's slightly positive or slightly negative. Yeah, so the closer it is to 1, the stronger is the correlation, and closer it is to -1, stronger is the negative correlation. And closer to 0, the correlation is very weak. So now we look at our data set. This is a slightly bigger data set. So we use pandas here. We import the data set, which is moving on streaming platforms. So yeah, we use the correlation method. We can see the correlation of all numerical numerical columns in the data frame. Since this is a method, all we have to do is call it, and we have to return the new value, which will show each correlation. So as you can see, ID is related to ID. Like first of all, the first observation we see is all the diagonal values are always 1, because the way they're related to each other is like it's just a one-on-one relation, right? So we can see this is always 1. The other things it shows is how year is related to Netflix, like how Netflix, the movie reviews for Netflix have gone up or gone down during the years. How Prime Video is related to Netflix. how Disney Plus is related to Prime Video. All of these things are shown here. We can also use like one particular, we can take the correlations for a particular column. So this is how we print the correlations for a particular column. So here I've put the correlations for year. So how year is related to year, that is one. How it's related to Netflix, Hulu, Prime Video, Disney Plus, and so on. Also one more thing I'd like to mention here is there are a couple of correlation values. So there is one called the Pearson's method, and we can also choose the Kendall or Spearman method. Pearson correlation evaluates the relationship between two continuous variables. Like the relationship should be linear, like when one variable is associated with a proportional change in the other variable. One example we can take is a child's height will keep increasing as his or her age increases. So over here, the default value for correlations function is always Pearson. But we can always choose Kendall or Spearman method. Spearman again is it's used to evaluate relationships for ordinal variables. Like we can use that to evaluate a monotonic relationship where the variables tend to change together, but not necessarily at a constant rate. So yeah, these were just a couple of things I would like to mention. Next, we come to heat maps. So now if we want to check correlation for the entire data set together, we use Seaborn. Now, if anyone of you would like to volunteer and what they understand from this graph, anyone? This is just a very simple graph. It's exactly what I've explained, the relation. Even the color scheme is given here. So if anyone would like to volunteer, otherwise I'll explain. Okay, I'll explain. So there are a couple of observations we have made from this data set. A slightly positive correlation can be seen between Netflix and year. So this is Netflix and this is year. So this is a slightly positive correlation. So which is about 0.25. We can see it in approximately that color scheme. We have a very strong negative correlation between Netflix and ID and Netflix and Prime Video. So this is Netflix and ID. We can see it's almost minus 0.75. And Netflix and Prime Video, which is, again, it's approximately somewhat in this range. Next, we also have a slightly negative correlation between year and Prime Video, Disney Plus and Prime Video. So here is year and here is Prime Video. So yeah, again, just a slightly negative one. Now, there is no correlation between runtime of any of the streaming platforms. So we can see there is no correlation between runtime and any of the platforms. So this is our observation from this data. So here, this is how we can have an approximate idea about the correlations of an entire data set. Pandas of now we go on to working with text data and all. So before that, we'll go on to a few statistical functions. Most of those Shubham has covered, but we'll just look at a few more. So here I've created a dictionary of series. I've given a name, I've given age and rating to all of these actors. So yeah, so first is the sum function. It just returns the sum of values for the requested axis. By default, this axis is 0, but we can change the axis as to 1. Here we get a sum and it just gives the total age and total rating. Mean gives the approximate mean. So age, the mean of all the ages is 31.8 and rating is 3.74. Standard deviation is the STD function. The describe function gives almost like whatever a few basic data that is needed for us. So it gives the count, mean, standard deviation, and yeah, all of these. Next we go on to the location function. So df.loc2, like df.location of 2. So what we have here at location 2 is Pam Beasley. So yeah, so we can extract that particular row or a group of rows. So a group of rows from 2 to 5. So we get it from Pam Beasley to Ross Geller. We go on to working with text data. Pandas offers a variety of text data functions. Like we can convert the data frame, like a particular row or column of, or even just a particular value to lower, upper. We can compute the length. We can strip off the white spaces or any of the commas or whatever. The split function splits each strings with the given pattern. We can use the concatenate function, get dummies function. The get dummies function, I will be explaining it later. We can use the replace function, like it replaces one particular value with the other. We use the repeat function for like we can get the repeated element for the specified number of times. We can use the starts with, ends with. We find a particular pattern and we find which of the data items starts with that or ends with that. We can find the first position of a occurrence of pattern, find all positions, swap case. We can check for lower and upper case characters. And yeah, if we can check if it's numeric. So first of all, we can extract a particular like a particular column from this, and then we go on to get dummies function. Now, what the get dummies function does is it's basically used for data manipulation. Here it converts categorical data into dummy or indicator values. So yeah, so one example I'll give you is Sheldon Cooper. So Sheldon Cooper is at position 3. So yeah, 1 second. So we get Sheldon Cooper at position 3. So it's just we can get a dummy data for each of the columns. So basically, it just gives us the binary values for that. So wherever it's present, it will just give a 1, and wherever it's not present, it's going to give us 0. So this can be used in like Shubham has taken up the Titanic data set. So in the Titanic data set, if we go on to the gender and like for the gender, so the people who are males could be given 1, and people who are females could be given 0. So that's one of the examples we can use get dummies for. We can use the replace function to replace Rachel Green with Monica Geller. So yeah, so we can see here that Rachel Green was replaced by Monica Geller. Here we can find if a particular pattern is met. So here I wanted to find Michael Scott. So it will give me true and all the other values were false. So yeah, this was pretty much, these were a couple of important functions in handling string. If anyone has any questions, otherwise we'll move forward. Okay, so I think Jatin, you can take over. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Ria. I hope nobody has any doubts. If you have, please go ahead. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, all right. So let's start with data visualization, right? So in general, you've learned NumPy and Pandas. Now you're going to be learning about Matplotlib, Seaborn, and other plotting theories and everything about that. In general, EDA, exploratory data analysis, is about asking questions about the data and making conclusions from it. Okay, this pre-processing and understanding your data distribution will help you in choosing the right algorithm and architecture of your choice. We'll be using this mindset throughout this notebook to make sure you get the best benefits from this session. In particularly we'll be using HYW approach, in which we'll explain how it works, why to use it, and where to use it, basically a real world case. So before we move on, I've shared this link in the chat. I believe I've shared this link. Go into the DataVis folder, the notebook, and yeah, open in Colab, right? So that you get to code along with me, and I'll be taking data sets from Seaborn. So you can choose any of these data sets to work on your own. And so you'll have 2 references with you to better understand the visualizing process. Okay.
I hope everyone, I'll just give like 5 to 10 seconds for everyone to open this in Colab. Okay. I'm just importing libraries here. Yeah. So we'll be working with 3 data sets right now. The planet dataset, flights, and tips dataset. So if you don't have any idea of what to do when you get a dataset, the first step is to head it, understand what it has. So I can see that flights dataset has passengers of different months and different years. So we can most probably use a heat map to analyze this. Then if I can just change this to planet and run it, you can see the planet has methods of measuring each of these quantities, the planet number, and different qualities of the planets, right? So we can try and visualize the relationship between each of these columns, right? So whenever trying to visualize any kind of data, you have to understand 3 different methods: univariate, bivariate, and multivariate. Univariate is just understanding the distribution of one column or one particular variable or the feature of the dataset. Bivariate is understanding the relationship between 2 variables. Multivariate is visualizing the relationship between 2 or more variables. We'll see examples of each of these 3 in the following plots. To get started, let's start off with something very simple: line plots and scatter plots. Line plots is very simple. You just have 2 values. It's a bivariate graphing plot. If I just run it, you can see the values are plotted. There's nothing too complex about it. Seaborn, however, gives you a lot more freedom to visualize it better. So as you saw in the flights dataset, we had the number of passengers in years and months. So we can use the hue parameter in the Seaborn library of line plot to understand the graph better. If I were to remove this hue, just run it like this, you would get something like this. And the light blue boundaries are something called as confidence intervals, which we'll learn further on. But just by this line plot, you can't learn too much. So again, hue. And then you can see the blue lines, that means months of July, June, and August are the most popular for people to use flights. So, you know, these small conclusions will really help you in cracking competitions such as Kaggle or even generally in the industry. So you learned about line plots. The next comes scatter plots. Why to use scatter plots? Well, let's just try plotting the mass and distance of the planet dataset, and you can just kind of see why line plots are not good for everything. Line plots are the first step in visualizing, but in general, as the situation changes, you can move on to more complex plots. Scatter plots is basically as simple as line plots. You just point those values in the graph. Again, here I can introduce hue, which is a very common feature in Seaborn, and I like to categorize it based on number. So if I run it, you can see, I think the hue is not really that good, but then the number, all the scatter points are classified based on the number feature. So you just got a glimpse of what confidence intervals are. Let's dive in a bit more. So confidence intervals are very, very important in data analysis and data visualization. Let's imagine you have a very big data set, right? Like 2 million, 3 million data points of whatever, numbers, text, anything. You most probably won't be able to use the entire population to get any kind of conclusions because it will take too long or it will be too computationally expensive. That's where sampling comes in. Sampling is very important so that you can try to generalize the whole data set with a sample. To understand and conclude things from a sample rather than a whole population, we use things such as confidence intervals that takes into consideration the sample mean, that is the mean of the sample, and tries to predict the population mean, that is the mean of the whole population. So again, as you can see, confidence interval displays the probability that a parameter will fall between a pair of values around the mean. Confidence intervals measure the degree of uncertainty or certainty in a sampling method. Let's take a more practical example. Let's say I have a data of like height of basketball players and I have a lot of data. With that lot of data, I understood that the confidence interval with these formulae is between 72 and 76 inches. If I were to go and sample 100 data points, just like randomly, then I can say that about 95 of the 100 will lie between the mean of the 95 should lie between 72 and 76. This helps us in better, understanding the data set with just a small sample, which is very good for computational purposes if you don't have that much power, and it isn't restricted to a sample mean. Any kind of sample variable, you can use this confidence interval. So in here you have sample mean, your sample variance, and so on and so forth. The formula here, if you want to learn more about the formula here, you can go to this book. This is where I've learned all my statistics from Sheldon Ross. It's very beautiful and it is very concise for beginners as well as experts. We'll learn a lot about data visualization from that book. So here, the most common confidence intervals are like 90, 95, and 99%. Again, this is basically saying that there's a 95% probability that the sample mean would lie in this two intervals. Okay. Again, a practical representation of that would be, I do the same thing that I did before, flights. You can see here, and I try to plot it as a scatter plot. So you can see what the light blue area is trying to cover, right? It's saying that 95% of the time, data points will lie here. Like the mean will lie along this line within these two intervals. If anyone has any doubts regarding confidence intervals, please go ahead. I'll just wait for a few seconds. This is a very important concept in data visualization. So make sure you're thorough with it. So if nobody has any more doubts, we can move on to the concept of percentiles. I believe everyone has a basic concept of what percentiles are, but let's just solve a few examples to get our mind warmed up. In general, the 100p percentile, here p is a value between 0 and 1. So if I want to say 80% percentile, the p will be 0.8. So 100p percentile is the data value, so is that 100p% of the data is less than or equal to it, and 101 minus p% are greater than or equal to it. If two values satisfy, we take the mean. So let's take an example here. We have 15 different cities with their population. This is an ordered data set, right? So let's try to find the 10th percentile and the 80th percentile. If I know the sample size is 25, here, because I'm trying to find the 10th percentile, p will be 0.1. So n into p will be 2.5. Going back to the definition, we want at least np values less than or equal to it. That means 2.5 values should be less than the 10th percentile. That is satisfied by 23rd rank and above, right? Because two values are less than or equal to it. Then the second is said at least n1 minus p of the values greater than or equal to it. n1 minus p is basically 25 minus 2.5, which is 22.5. So we want 22.5 values to be greater than or equal to it. There we go. We find out that Boston is the only data value that satisfies these two conditions. Therefore, the 10th percentile is the third smallest value, which is 590,763. The same concept can be used to find the 80th percentile, but here, as this is an integer, you'll find that both the 21st smallest and the 20th smallest, that means the 5th and 6th respectively, satisfy these two conditions. Therefore, we'll have to take a mean. These are the very basic concepts that we have learned in school as well. So let's build off of that. The box plots are directly using the concept of percentiles. As you can see in this figure, I'm trying to visualize this normal distribution in the form of box plots. Here, Q1 represents the 25th percentile. We've calculated 10th percentile, just as we'll calculate 25th percentile. Q3 represents the 75th percentile, and interquartile range is the difference between them. Box plots are also very efficient and a simple way to detect outliers. This is the lower adjacent boundary and this is the upper adjacent boundary. With the help of this, I have a very simple way of identifying any outliers that there are in the data. You can see these green dots are usually outliers. Yeah, so from box plots, we get median, interquartile range, lower and upper adjacent values for simple detection of outliers. Let's use a practical data set to visualize it better. We're loading in tips, which basically has how people give tips, or like whether it's a male, whether they smoke, what time of day it is, so on and so forth. If we just try to visualize the total bill, we can see that the median of the bill lies around $18, and anything above 40 is detected to be an outlier, meaning we can't really consider them while trying to generalize a relationship. Seaborn again offers many different ways to categorize and understand more about the data. So I plot the day versus the total bill. You can see for each different day, the median values are different, and obviously on weekends, people spend more, people come to restaurants more often. So all around interquartile range is more, median is higher. These are the small conclusions that you can get. Seaborn again offers more complex visualization, where we already are categorizing with respect to day. We'll also categorize with respect to whether they are smokers or not. So there's so many things that you can conclude from this graph alone, right? Moving on, we have histograms. Again, histograms are very simple. We're basically trying to divide the data range into intervals and plot their frequencies, so we can see what the distribution is, right? So here around 3.0 to 3.25, there is about like this much. They have like 35 density basically. An important thing to note about histograms is that you cannot say that at 3.2 there are 35 values or something like that. Histograms and in general even Z-scores work based on intervals. You can only use intervals to find out conclusions about your data. So you can say like from 2.5 to 3.0, the density will be the area under this curve. That's a valid conclusion that you can get from histograms and Z-score graphs. Now, a problem with histograms is that they're built up using rectangles, basically. Like these rigid and cornered rectangles are not really that realistic, right? In real life, relationship between data is much more smoother. So here, instead of using rectangles, we'll use the sack of sand function. This creates a much smoother and real-world estimate of the data. This is known as KDE, or kernel distribution estimation. Here's the formula for it. And with the lower formula, we can change the height of this curve and in general create complex graphs such as this. This is very useful for multimodal data analysis, which basically means data set with multiple peaks, such as the red one here. If you have understood box plots and KDE, kernel distribution estimation, we can move to violent plots, which basically is the combination of those two. Box plots gives you the interquartile range, first and third quartile, and a way to detect outliers. So the same is true with violent plots. The middle line here, the end of the middle line is basically the adjacent points in box plots. And anything that goes above or below it are outliers in general. And this graph that surrounds the line is basically the KDE. So you can get idea about the distribution of the data as well as the interquartile range, median, and so on and so forth. We can use this function to plot three things at once. To explain, I'm using subplots of matplotlib to generate 3x1 plots like this. The first plot would be the histogram and KDE achieved with this plot of Seaborn. The second is the box plot, and third is finally the combination of both violent plots. For a normal Gaussian distribution, you can see this is a very familiar curve to all of you, I believe. Right? box plots here, and here we go, the violin plot that is able to give all the conclusions of the box plot and the KDE. For a log normal distribution, these are the three graphs. The graph is very, skewed to the right. In a more practical example, we can use the total bill as we used for other functions to graph the violin plot. Now, violin plot is usually symmetric on both sides. We don't really need that always. So we can replace the second side and use it to categorize. So here I use the hue parameter of smoker. So I can understand the interquartile range and the different distributions, different density distributions of whether it's a smoker or not. So as you can see, the outliers are bigger in this case. You can get various conclusions from this. I hope everyone has understood all about violin plots. We can now move on to heat maps. I believe Ria has already explained a bit about heat maps. So I'm just loading in this data set, right? We've already loaded in this data set. And I want everyone to understand this. This is a very simple example of a heat map. From this, we can understand, as we did in the line plots, that June and July have usually more passengers. The same goes for the heat map. June and July are generally have a lighter shade. That means that they are more frequent. Another example of plotting functions in Seaborn is catplot, which is basically a categorical plot. It basically uses everything that you have learned, all the different plots that you know, and combines them into different grids. So I'm trying to plot box plots, right? With this parameter kind, I'm plotting the box plots. And I'm saying the columns of the grid are separated with respect to time. So time is lunch and time is dinner. So based on the two categories, I'm differentiating the columns, and inside the columns, I'm differentiating with respect to smoker, whether it's a smoker or not. A more complex example of that will be grids, basically achieving the same thing as them, but not being restricted to categorical values, showing all different types of numerical values as well. This is a very similar graph that you've seen before, but in a different format. Distribution of the frequencies between with respect to the days: Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, Friday. So these are the most commonly used plots in Seaborn and Matplotlib. There are various more complex ways to understand more about the data, and I believe that's for you to find out. So this is the homework, and this will only help you. Okay, so I want you to go to the data, and you see these are like 9 to 10 different data sets. Pick one or two and try to get conclusions from it, right? You have access to this Colab notebook, and use all the different plots that you have learned to understand more about the data and try to conclude the relationships between different data sets. Okay. In particularly this data set, carbon nanotubes, this one is particularly hard to deal with. It has a lot of need of pre-processing. I want everyone to go to data folder and try downloading and try to pre-process it. In general, you should go to sites such as Kaggle or MCI to understand. So just like pick up one data set and try everything that you have learned. All right. Again, yeah, this book is very important. So if you get time, please go through it. I believe that will be it from my end. If anyone has any doubts, you can go ahead.